Good morning, everyone. My name is Petr Nemeth. I'm the CEO of Dataddo, and I would like to welcome you today on the webinar. That topic is data security, the modern approach. Especially with regards towards the using the data stack. Before everyone else will join in, I guess it will be a couple of seconds, couple of minutes. So let me do a little bit of a housekeeping here. When it comes to this webinar and when it comes to the data security itself, I would like to mention that there is a Q&A session which will be held at the end of this webinar, roughly in the last 5 minutes. So of course, in case you have any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A session, and I will be more than happy to answer all your questions. Feel free to do so, of course, during the webinar. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait, till the end. Let me actually share my screen and proceed with the agenda of today's webinar. At the beginning, of course, I would like to mention a little disclaimer. As you know, I'm the CEO of Dataddo, and this webinar, its topic, secure data integration, the modern approach. So of course, I will be talking a lot about the various solutions, various vendors. I would like to be, as objective as possible. So this webinar is not meant to be a promotion for Dataddo, but to give you some sort of solid recommendation how to approach the data. But of course, it's good to mention this little disclaimer that I actually work at Dataddo. So when it comes to the agenda of our webinar, at the beginning, I would like to briefly lay out the background and talk a little bit about what is of course happening in the data world and what are the implications towards the security and compliance. Then I would like to follow up with the 3 core principles for data security to follow. Of course, there is various different approaches, but given the fact that we have only 30 minutes. So I would like to digest it into let's say 3 simple core principles to follow. And then of course, if you are right now in the buying process, or if you are somehow re-evaluating, validating your data stack, I would like to mention some specific requirements to the data vendors for you to actually make sure that your solutions, your data stack is up to date with all the security and compliance requirements. So as a beginning, just to lay out a little bit of background. So of course, we live at what can be called as a data age. And this can be characterized as a exponential growth of the various number of software as a service business applications. So you can see that there is a lot of systems for managing your customers, managing your finance, managing your marketing, etc. And we can expect that this number is numbers will be growing in the future as well. You might say that there is app for everything, for every some sort of business operation, and if not. If there is not such application, you can bet that there will be one in the future. Of course, we live in a time when there is a heavily promoted, and of course, rightly so, data-driven culture. We see that today's world is more and more dependent on the various, mathematical, statistical models. Thus, more and more dependent on the actual, data inputs that we provide. We also see that there is still a lack of experienced personnel on the job market, on the let's say right technical level for doing some sort of various data engineering, data scientific operations. On the other hand, we see that there has been a very great advancement in the selection of the data tools when it comes to various data warehousing, data integration, data visualization technologies. There is a nice portfolio of vendors that you can choose from, And of course, because of there is an abundance of the data, there is a more and more inclination towards working with the data across the organizations, across the departments. More and more people are actually asking for access of the data, and lots of the decisions these days are actually being backed by the data. We can sum it up as some sort of data democratization process where more and more people are actually involved with working with the data itself. This is great. This is great. Of course, as is being said, sharing is caring, but there are some serious implications, and the serious implications are mainly on the security and the compliance side. So we can say that MDS, or what can be called as a modern data stack, there is a great range of tools on the market right now that enable you for sharing, moving, analyzing, profiling the data across various people, across various departments. You can see that there is a lot of ETL, ELT, iPaaS platforms, various data warehousing, cloud data warehousing solutions, data visualization solutions that actually input the data models and builds some AI engineering, artificial intelligence models on top of that. And there is also lots of tools for logging and making sure that everything is in place. What is important to mention that this, let's say, easiness of sharing and working with the data has one profound implication. So imagine a situation where you have a systems like Salesforce, where you held all your data about your customers, or your payroll systems, or your ERP systems, where you have all the invoicing and payment details. And those kind of systems, they have very, I would say, very strictly controlled, access levels. So there is a certain amount of people that can access the data from those systems. But of course, once you connect those systems through various, integrations, database solutions, this has a profound implication in a way that the downstream systems that are actually extracting the data from the systems where data originate might have completely different access level control. And this of course might cause some potential issues, because the people that are at the end of the day working with the data in the data warehouse that actually originate in your ERP system might not have that level of confidence from the management as the original operators of the ERP systems, and this is often forget. So therefore, this means that sensitive data like payrolls, payroll information about some sensitive information about the customers, their billing periods, how much they are actually spending, might be easily leaked just because you connect your ERP system towards the data warehouse, and you are a little bit of a clumsy in terms of writing the SQL query to do a customer profiling. So in order to stay compliant, in order to, let's say, make sure that there are right data security policies in place, I try to distill this into a 3 core principles that I think every company that is somewhat or that someone wants to be compliant, that someone wants to put some data security policy in place should follow. So of course, the first principle is what can be called as a separation of concerns. What does separation of concerns mean? It means that you have one system. You can say, you have one system when you are running some sort of production database, where, for instance, imagine a situation that you are a large e-commerce company, you have built your internal system on top of maybe some open source solution. You have there all your inventory. You have there all your information about your customers, of your orders. This might be connected to your CRM system, and it might be connecting to your payment system as well. Of course, as the e-commerce company is growing, as there are more and more orders happening, this actually creates a very nice, data set to analyze. So once you hire a first data engineer, data scientist into your company, what they would ask you, I would like to get the access to the data set with all the orders, with all the information, so I can write some nice data models about how, for instance, the weather impacts the ordering process, or what is the most popular item in that specific category. So, really interesting data with some, true business insight. But of course, what this means that in practice, you would need to give the access to that analyst, to that particular database where all those operations are happening. Of course, there might be some concerns when it comes to stability of the system. So imagine a situation, pretty much anyone who has ever written some SQL query with regards to get some analytical information. You are probably using a lot of joins. You are using a lot of orders. You are using a lot of groupings, and of course, this has some performance implications on the underlying database. So first and foremost, by just running a simple analytics queries on the production database, you can make the system inoperable. But of course, there are a multitude of technical solutions that can be avoided by that. But more importantly, you actually give that analyst the full access to all the data that are there, and it doesn't necessarily need to be something he or she doesn't necessarily could have some bad intention in terms of harm your company, but for the sake of make his or her job easier, he or she might just easily export the data about your customers into some Excel sheet for instance, or Google Sheet, or to some visualization tool, then share the dashboard, and you can see that the data that had been originally confined in a very restricted system has been somewhat compromised. And right now we are just talking about the e-commerce data. So the separation of concerns means that you will clearly define what kind of data needs to be are good for the analysis, and by using a various data replication techniques, you can replicate the portion of the data or part of the data into another data warehouse. So you can say you have a production database running on the Postgres, and you want to use a data replication to send the data to some database that has been designed for the analytics workloads like Redshift, BigQuery, or Snowflake. But of course, when doing the data replication, you can actually do only a subset of that original data. So making sure that you don't have that the analyst that is working on the data set doesn't have the access to that sensitive data. So this is first principle: identify what data are good for the analytics. Make sure that those data are being replicated to some sort of secured or even sandbox environment where the analysts can play with that. And once they are playing with that, they actually don't do any harm to your production system. And if the data somewhat get leaked, or if the data might be might become somewhat more publicly available than you originally intended to do, this doesn't pose any source of serious threat to your company. So this is the principle number one. The principle number two is it's a little bit connected towards the with the actual separation of concerns as well. This can be called as a data exclusion or data masking or data hashing. So there are several different terms that is using for that, but the principle is the same. I would like to mention specifically one thing, and of course I don't want to bash our competitors here, but there are some ELT solutions on the market that do exactly what you see here. So imagine a situation that you are connecting to your CRM system or to your ERP system with all the payment information about your customers. What some of the ELT vendors does, they basically connect to those systems, get the data in not very formatted way. Here you can see that the data are actually being extracted in a complex JSONs, and then dump them into data warehouse. So what actually happened here is that all the core information, as you can see, of course, here we have some information about the order on this example, but you can imagine that this could be information about your customers. All the information are actually being dumped to your data warehouse, and this means that the data are getting a little bit of out of the control. So in order to cope with this, there is a process of data exclusion, which means that, and this is something that is good to look at specifically when you are thinking about how to modernize or how to reevaluate your data stack, is that you can actually prevent most of the issues with the data security and the data compliance right at the extraction level by not even allow the data that are potentially sensitive to get to your downstream system. Because of course, once the data get to your data warehouse, where you have a completely different access control to that, this might cause a potential problem. But in case you have a system in place that allows you to select only a subset of the data right at the extraction level, so actually no potentially sensitive data get to your data warehouse at the first place, you actually solve most of the problem. So whenever you are evaluating your data stack, specifically, with regards towards the ETL ELT solution, this is the thing to look at, and this is let's say the part that is important to pay the attention to. Of course, there are some situations where, for instance, you need that information in order to, let's say, calculate the uniqueness of the customer. So here is an example that, for instance, imagine a situation when you have a list of customers, and the customers, the only sensible identifier of that customer is the email address, or it could be user. Of course, email address in some cases might be considered as sensitive information. So what to do in such cases is to use what can be called as a data masking. This means that instead of let's say not allowing the data to be extracted at all, you will mask the data or hash the data more specifically during the extraction process. So instead of the email address that you see peter.nemeth@dataddo.com, it will become actually a unencryptable or undecryptable hash. This has a very good attribute The good attribute is that the information is still unique. So you can still calculate the uniqueness of the customer. Only you are not able to read that particular email address. So you are still able to identify, join the customers, join the information together, because the nice feature of the hash function is that whatever input you put into that, you will always get the constant output. So you don't actually need to work with the actual email addresses. You can only work with the hashes. So this allows you to actually maintain the uniqueness of the data, but at the same time, you don't expose any of the sensitive information to be put into your downstream data stack system. And the last principle that is good to mention is something that can be called as a auditing, logging, Lineage, pretty much making sure that there are systems in place that allows you to understand who is accessing the data, how is accessing the data, and where the data are flowing. And of course, again, whenever you are thinking about your potential data stack reinvention, data stack reevaluation, it is good to look at those specific informations. Whether this particular vendor, whether it's data pipelining solution, whether it's data warehouse, whether it's visualization tool, whether it has the capabilities of doing the logs, of keeping the logs, of working together with the data lineage tools that allows you to actually easily monitor the various data streams, whether there is a role-based access control in place, meaning that you actually have in those systems the information who was accessing the particular data, how was accessing the data, what was read, and of course, this gives you some sort of assurance. Then when something wrong happened or when there is a potential security incident, you have the ability to do some forensic analysis to make sure that you will be able to mitigate any potential damage. So of course, there are some examples from the Dataddo platform how we are particularly approach that. But this is the third important component. So first, separation of concerns, making sure that you identify which of the data can be shared, and they are put into some sort of sandbox environment with a restricted access. Second, making sure that you either use the data exclusion, data masking, data hashing to make sure that any potentially sensitive information are not being shared at all towards the downstream systems, or if they are shared, that they are somewhat masked or hashed, so they cannot be easily decrypted. And C, making sure that there is a strong level of control, level of logging in place to make sure that if anything goes wrong, you have the capability of actually mitigate any potential issues. And the last thing to talk about is what I would see as a key requirements for the data vendor, specifically when you are actually re-evaluating your data stack, or whether you plan to modernize your tool and you find a data security and compliance as a key factor to consider. So number one, I would say, of course, there is a lot of security certification and policies in place. But I would like to specifically look at something that is called SOC2, which is the standard for the way how mostly internet companies or digital companies are actually handling the customer's data. It's good to mention that there are two types, type 1 and type 2. And I would strongly suggest to look at type 2, because type 2 means that there is actually a auditing and monitoring period in place, which is typically 6 months. And there is a final report that is covering that monitoring period. So because type 1 is typically that the company only declares its compliance, and this has been validated, so to speak, against the paper. But type 2 actually means that there is somebody, typically some sort of auditing body, that actually went into the organization, look at the systems, look at the documents, look at the processes, and make sure that everybody is in place. So I will strongly suggest to look at the vendors that has this the certification. The second standard is ISO 27001. I would say that in case the company doesn't have a SOC 2 Type 2, the ISO 27001 might be a minimal requirement at least, because of course, unlike the SOC 2 Type 2, this is only kind of declaration of the compliance and the compliance against the paper, so to speak. But still, it actually expressed some sort of willingness of the company to deal, with some potential compliance issue and making sure there are some processes in place. But SOC 2 Type 2 would be the winner here in terms of certification and compliance. There is also some major data protection standard that the company needs to be compliant with. There are typically specific for region. So you have a GDPR in Europe, POPIA in the South Africa, for instance. But typically, when the company is SOC 2 Type 2 certified and compliant, those measures are typically in place as well. Definitely look at the data masking, data exclusion capability. Whether it's this is more specifically towards the data integration vendors. So when you are considering to modernizing your stack, and specifically the part that is actually moving the data around, look at the capabilities, whether it's possible to actually exclude some of the data, it's possible to mask, to hash the data, to make sure you stay compliant. RBAC, role-based access control. Simply put, the vendor, the platform allows you to have multiple users with multiple permissions. So you have users for reading, you have users for actually editing all the things, users for authorizing something. So it's good to have this policy in place as well. Data encryption. So there are basically two types of data encryption. Data encryption in rest and in transit. So again, depends on what specific vendor are you looking at. If you are looking on somebody that is moving data around, ask about the data in transit encryption, how this is being handled. Whether, for instance, the vendor allows you to use techniques like SSH tunneling, VPNs, and similar technologies. If you are looking at the vendor that has some storage capabilities, ask about how the encryption at rest is handled. What kind of ciphers are being used? Typically, these days there are. I would suggest to look for things like AES 256, which is the let's say synchronous encryption standard for synchronous encryption. Also, what is good to look at or good to ask for is how the keys for encryption, if this is the case, are being stored. So I don't know how much you are familiar with the services like AWS KMS for managing the keys, but this is actually a good practice to do that, because when the vendor is using a service like that, they actually don't have the actual access to the keys, and the data encryption is actually happening through the API. And this, of course, means that if the data are being encrypted at rest, and the keys are only being accessible to third-party vendor, not the actual vendor, this, of course, adds an additional layer of security. And the last thing, connected to the number 3 principle, make sure that there is a logging in place, make sure that the tool is compliant and compatible with the some of the data lineage vendors, to make sure that you can easily map the data and the data flows that are happening. So thank you. This was all about my my little presentation. So I would like to check the Q&A session if there has been any question asked. So I don't see that there has been so there is no question asked. Never mind. If you have any questions that you perhaps don't want to ask right now, feel free to contact me through my email address. It's petr.nemeth@dataddo.com. I will be more than happy to share and, of course, discuss any data security related questions. And of course, as always, this session will be recorded, so you will be the recording will be directly sent to you. So you will have the ability to actually play it later, share it with your colleagues, and of course, this session will be available on the YouTube and the other platforms as well. So I see that we are a little bit a little bit late here. So again, thanks a lot for your participation. Thanks a lot for the attention. And I wish you a pleasant and successful start in the new year, and looking forward to see you at the next webinar. Thank you.